Well, hello and good evening. I am Sam and you are listening to Chilliteracy, where Joey wishes to also thank you for being here and for listening in. He was fine. He was asleep on the bed where he has been happily and contentedly sleeping. And then, I just sort of tried warming up my voice a little bit before we start, and suddenly, hey, I wish to be here now. I need to be on your lap because I've remembered you're in the room. So then he came over and thought he'd just scratch my leg to let me know that he wished to have attention and maybe could he come up. So that's where we're at now. But yes, your favourite cat streamer, Joey. Yeah, that is him. He's here now. Hello, my love. How are you? Good. He is well. But yes, hello and good evening and welcome to... I didn't expect it to just be 4 parts long, but part 4 and part final of 3 Men in a Boat. We have already just... Well, I mean, we've not reached it yet. I'm not just going to chapter 14, the end. Thank you for listening. There's some words to come in between. Parola, hello and welcome. The boating won you over? Good. I am glad. And to everyone else as well. Obviously, Lucy, Andy Pants, Lady Mephistopheles. Anyone else who has been here sneaking? No, we're good. That's the list. Yeah, hello. Welcome. It's good to see you. And if there's anyone new who's dropping in and lurking, also lovely to see you and have you here. You're welcome to lurk away. Chatting is not mandatory. You got both streams on at once? Nice. I'm sure they complement each other very nicely. But yes, trying to think what else I have to say. We have 3 Men in a Boat, to say nothing of the dog, which is coming up in a bit. I do have some content warnings to give out first. How am I? Yeah, I think I'm mostly doing okay. I've been sleeping. Oh, my Sponge Rock song is playing. Yes, good. To be honest, I'd pretty much like to play most of certainly Mouth Dreams on Dave's stream because there's a lot of very good stuff on there. But some of his older stuff as well. And sadly, as I've lamented to Lucy and on my own Mastodon account, what I want now, what I'm actually just suddenly really, really craving, what I'm craving is for someone else out there to have done a bunch of work for free and to give it to me. What I'm craving is for a new Neil Cicierega album so that I can do a completely fresh live listen. I want that experience. I want to turn on the stream, play it with an audience and have everyone enjoy hearing it for the first time together, because you don't get to do that very often and it's kind of special, and I would love to participate in that. It would be amazing. So you vividly remember listening to it with me at my place? Yeah, it was that was a time. If challenged, I could quite happily enjoy, I think, writing some kind of essay or academic work on the comedy that goes into those things. How it's not just, we take one song and we mash it up with another song. If they're meme songs, all the better, and a bit of Shrek. There is genuine artistry and comedic joke development that goes into those edits. It is something very, and he's not the only person that does it. There's going to be plenty of very good mashup artists out there, but yeah, just you're listening to it and he's doing things to taking your expectations from the song and then messing with it in some way to wrong foot you, little things like that, or just very good at pulling out those key themes and expectations from a song and then inverting them, subverting them, doing things with them, mixing them up with other songs that you didn't think would work but also thematically mesh well together to form weird meta levels of jokes. It's really quite good. And so yeah, that's my like drop and give me a TED talk now kind of thing. I think just off the cuff. I don't have it ready to go, but I could probably prepare that pretty quickly. Yeah, it's a thing I enjoy. So yeah, I would love another album. It's been a few years, but obviously he's going to be a busy lad doing stuff. And as I say, it's kind of unpaid work, so yeah. But I would take it. But yeah. Tonight, 3 Men in a Boat. As I said a minute ago, we do actually have some content warnings. One of which I was trying to find before I started, because I sort of read this in stages over the course of the week, and obviously the first chapters I read furthest away, and chapter 15, the second chapter coming up tonight, I'd written myself the note, thoughts about women, and I'm not entirely certain what I meant by that, other than I feel like Jerome probably expresses like I have thought about women, caught in 720p. No, I feel like Jerome, character / narrator, expresses some sort of very archaic views about women, maybe. As I say, I can't actually find the bit to remind myself what it was he says, which, you know, he's obviously done a few times throughout the book, but I guess that was something that I wanted to just like flag up, to be like, hey, you know, it's difficult to judge in a comedy what's author and what's character. I feel like in this, probably most of the toxic views expressed can be attributed to the character. But yeah, I guess that's the first thing I wanted to flag up. I don't know, we'll see when we get there. I'll probably realise when I get there and go, oh, internally, whilst carrying on with a straight face. So many books you've read have misogynistic views. Exactly. It's just sort of part and parcel, really, with where they are. Will they get through this without destroying the boat? I am not going to say a thing. Yeah, Literacy does not endorse the views of Jerome K. Jerome or his character, Jerome K. Jerome. Second thing, and I guess a slightly more serious content warning. Firstly, in which I don't know. Again, I don't remember. I think it might be chapter 15. There's firstly sort of a. Yeah, we had this discussion on the Longest John's channel the other day. How do you give a content warning about a subject when the subject itself is one of those things that you're trying to warn people about and can be kind of upsetting, distressing, or triggering for people? And in this particular case, the subject is suicide. So I'm just sort of putting that word out there now, and if that's not something people want to hear discussed, then please consider yourself, warned for the next part of the discussion. Firstly, chapter I think 15, but somewhere along coming up in this first half, there's sort of a kind of a casual crack that he makes about it's just sort of commenting on like the, I guess, inhospitability of the water, commenting that it's a good place if you want to go and commit suicide, which I see what he's making, I see what the joke is, but I feel like probably now that's considered a little bit more of a tasteless kind of joke to make. And so I just wanted to, I guess, spoil the joke. Don't worry, there's plenty of good ones, and flag that up. But secondly, on a more serious note, in chapter 16, and this is one that I will attempt to actually flag up with I will try to remember to verbally say content warning for those that wish it, or something along those lines when I get to it. There is a sort of rather lengthy digression into just a sad tale of a woman who is experiencing hard times and ends up drowning herself in a river. And mercifully, there is no punchline to the end of it, but it also feels very, very weird and very starkly contrasting with... Oh, thank you, Lady Mephistopheles, for the link. Yes, much appreciated. No, not reply. Oh, thank you, Lucy, for pinning that. But yeah, it just sort of, it comes out of nowhere, and tonally is very sharply contrasting with the rest of the book. Like there's been a couple of times where he's made sort of a slightly darker joke or something like that, and as I say, mercifully he doesn't like go through all this really kind of sad, depressing story to then deliver a crack at the end. But it's just kind of there, and it comes out of nowhere, and yeah, I figure again that might be something that could be a bit upsetting to people, so I will try to flag it up verbally when I get there, and to say when it's finished, and if people want to like put that in chat for anyone who may not want to listen but want to come back in after it's safe, then I would appreciate someone doing so if you could. Oh, bless. Joey is he's just settled with his chin over my arm. It is adorable. I wish I could share a picture, but I cannot. With that said, I think the only other thing to note is that I have a fly in my room who seems to be one of those like... Oh wait, what to put in chat? Just that when I like sort of flag up the content warning for the bit that people may wish to zone out for, just sort of when that starts and when that finishes. It's safe to come back now kind of thing. Cheers. And much appreciated. Yes, the other thing is I have a fly in the room. It's... as flies go, I'm sure they're not operating within the broadest scope of reason and intelligence, but you do get some that just do not want to live very long and are very interested in people and faces and stuff, and there's one of those in my room. I can tell it's going to try and get in my face while I'm reading, so I may be distracted by that at times. You wish Twitch would allow pictures? Yes, it is strange that Twitch doesn't allow pictures. That is very bizarre. Okay, no, I'm not going to I could literally just like swap to another scene with the camera on so you can see Joey. He's actually taken his head off my arm, so yes. I forget that too sometimes, but yeah. It's literally a website for like 60 pictures a second. Anyway, I'm going to stop roasting. Joey is best boy, he is, and he's absolutely going to distract me in the middle of this. But since we have a bit more to get through than is usual, because as I say, we're going to the end of the book, and that means slightly larger sections on each side, we shall begin. So, if everyone is ready, then let us begin 3 Men in a Boat by Jerome K. Jerome, Chapter 14. Wargrave, waxworks, sonning, our stew. Montmorency is sarcastic. Fight between Montmorency and a tea kettle. George's banjo studies meet with discouragement. Difficulties in the way of the musical amateur. Learning to play the bagpipes. Harris feels sad after supper. George and I go for a walk. Return hungry and wet. There is a strangeness about Harris. Harris and the Swans, a remarkable story. Harris has a troubled night. We caught a breeze after lunch, which took us gently up past Wargrave and Shiplake. Mellowed in the drowsy sunlight of a summer's afternoon, Wargrave, nestling where the river bends, makes a sweet old picture as you pass it, and one that lingers upon the retina of memory. The George and Dragon at Wargrave boasts a sign, painted on the one side by Leslie, R.A., and on the other by Hodgson of that ilk. Leslie has depicted the fight. Hodgson has imagined the scene after the fight. George, the work done, enjoying his pint of beer. Day, the author of Sandford and Merton, lived and, more credit to the place still, was killed at Wargrave. In the church, in his memorial to Mrs. Sarah Hill, who bequeathed £1 annually to be divided at Easter between 2 boys and 2 girls who had never been undutiful to their parents and who had never been known to swear or to tell untruths, to steal or to break windows. Fancy giving up all that for 5 shillings a year. It is not worth it. It is rumoured in the town that once, many years ago, a boy appeared who really never had done these things, or, at all events, which was all that was required or could be expected, had never been known to do them, and thus won the crown of glory. He was exhibited for 3 weeks afterwards in the town hall under a glass case. What has become of the money since no one knows. They say it is always handed over to the nearest waxworks show. Shiplake is a pretty village, but it cannot be seen from the river, being upon the hill. Tennyson was married in Shiplake Church. The river up to Sonning winds in and out through many islands, and is very placid, hushed, and lonely. Few folk, except at twilight, a pair or two of rustic lovers, walk along its banks. Harry and Lord Fitznoodle have been left behind at Henley, and dismal, dirty Reading is not yet reached. It is a part of the river in which to dream of bygone days, and vanished forms and faces, and things that might have been, but are not, confound them. We got out at Sonning, and went for a walk round the village. It is the most fairy-like little nook on the whole river. It is more like a stage village than one built of bricks and mortar. Every house is smothered in roses, and now, in early June, they were bursting forth in clouds of dainty splendour. If you stop at Sonning, put up at the Bull behind the church. It is a veritable picture of an old country inn, with green, square courtyard in front, where, on seats beneath the trees, the old men group of an evening to drink their ale and gossip over village politics, with low, quaint rooms and latticed windows and awkward stairs and winding passages. We roamed about sweet Sonning for an hour or so, and then, it being too late to push on past Reading, we decided to go back to one of the Shiplake Islands and put up there for the night. It was still early when we got settled, and George said that, as we had plenty of time, it would be a splendid opportunity to try a good slap-up supper. He said he would show us what could be done up the river in the way of cooking, and suggested that, with the vegetables and the remains of the cold beef and general odds and ends, we should make an Irish stew. It seemed a fascinating idea. George gathered wood and made a fire, and Harris and I started to peel the potatoes. I should never have thought that peeling potatoes was such an undertaking. The job turned out to be the biggest thing of its kind that I had ever been in. We began cheerfully, one might almost say skittishly, but our light-heartedness was gone by the time the first potato was finished. The more we peeled, the more peel there seemed to be left on. By the time we had got all the peel off and all the eyes out, there was no potato left. At least none worth speaking of. George came and had a look at it. It was about the size of a peanut. He said, "Oh, that won't do, you're wasting them. You must scrape them." So we scraped them, and that was harder work than peeling. They are such an extraordinary shape, potatoes, all bumps and warts and hollows. We worked steadily for 25 minutes, and did 4 potatoes. Then we struck. We said we should require the rest of the evening for scraping ourselves. I never saw such a thing as potato scraping for making a fellow in a mess. It seemed difficult to believe that the potato scrapings in which Harris and I stood half smothered could have come off 4 potatoes. It shows you what can be done with economy and care. George said it was absurd to have only 4 potatoes in an Irish stew, so we washed half a dozen or so more and put them in without peeling. We also put in a cabbage and about half a peck of peas. George stirred it all up, and then he said there seemed to be a lot of room to spare, so we overhauled both the hampers and picked out all the odds and ends and the remnants and added them to the stew. There were half a pork pie and a bit of cold boiled bacon left, and we put them in. Then George found half a tin of potted salmon, and he emptied that into the pot. He said that was the advantage of Irish stew. You got rid of such a lot of things. I fished out a couple of eggs that had got cracked, and we put those in. George said they would thicken the gravy. I forget the other ingredients, but I know nothing was wasted, and I remember that, towards the end, Montmorency, who had evinced great interest in the proceedings throughout, strolled away with an earnest and thoughtful air, reappearing a few minutes afterwards with a dead water-rat in his mouth, which he evidently wished to present as his contribution to the dinner. Whether in a sarcastic spirit or with a genuine desire to assist, I cannot say. We had a discussion as to whether the rat should go in or not. Harris said he thought it would be all right, mixed up with the other things, and that every little helped. But George stood up for precedent. He said he had never heard of water rats in Irish stew, and he would rather be on the safe side and not try experiments. Harris said, "If you never try a new thing, how can you tell what it's like? It's men such as you that hamper the world's progress. Think of the man who first tried German sausage." It was a great success, the Irish stew. I don't think I ever enjoyed a meal more. There was something so fresh and piquant about it. One's palate gets so tired of the old hackneyed things. Here was a dish with a new flavour, with a taste like nothing else on earth. And it was nourishing too. As George said, there was good stuff in it. The peas and potatoes might have been a bit softer, but we all had good teeth, so that did not matter much. And as for the gravy, it was a poem. A little too rich, perhaps, for a weak stomach, but nutritious. We finished up with tea and cherry tart. Montmorency had a fight with the kettle during tea time and came off a poor second. Sorry, I think someone's shouting outside, but it sounds like a peacock. Throughout the trip he had manifested great curiosity concerning the kettle. He would sit and watch it as it boiled with a puzzled expression, and would try and rouse it every now and then by growling at it. When it began to splutter and steam, he regarded it as a challenge, and would want to fight it, only, at that precise moment, someone would always dash up and bear off his prey before he could get at it. Today he determined he would be beforehand. At the first sound the kettle made, he rose, growling, and advanced towards it in a threatening attitude. It was only a little kettle, but it was full of pluck, and it up and spat at him. "Ah, would ye?" growled Montmorency, showing his teeth. "I'll teach ye to check a hard-working, respectable dog, you miserable, long-nosed, dirty-looking scoundrel ye! Come on!" And he rushed at that poor kettle and seized it by the spout. Then, across the evening stillness, broke a blood-curdling yelp, and Montmorency left the boat, and did a constitutional 3 times round the island at the rate of 35 miles an hour, stopping every now and then to bury his nose in a bit of cool mud. From that day, Montmorency regarded the kettle with a mixture of awe, suspicion, and hate. Whenever he saw it, he would growl and back at a rapid rate, with his tail shut down, and the moment it was put upon the stove, he would promptly climb out of the boat and sit on the bank till the whole tea business was over. George got out his banjo after supper and wanted to play it, but Harris objected. He said he had got a headache and did not feel strong enough to stand it. George thought that the music might do him good, said music often soothed the nerves and took away a headache, and he twanged 2 or 3 notes, just to show Harris what it was like. Harris said he would rather have the headache. George has never learned to play the banjo to this day. He has had too much all-round discouragement to meet. He tried on 2 or 3 evenings, while we were up the river, to get a little practice, but it was never a success. Harris's language used to be enough to unnerve any man, added to which Montmorency would sit and howl steadily right through the performance. It was not giving the man a fair chance. "What do you want to howl like that for when I'm playing?" George would exclaim indignantly, while taking aim at him with a boot. "What do you want to play like that for when he's howling?" Harris would retort, catching the boot. "You let him alone, he can't help howling. He's got a musical ear and your playing makes him howl." So George determined to postpone study of the banjo until he reached home. But he did not get much opportunity even there. Mrs. P. used to come up and say she was very sorry. For herself, she liked to hear him, but the lady upstairs was in a very delicate state, and the doctor was afraid it might injure the child. Then George tried taking it out with him late at night and practising round the square. But the inhabitants complained to the police about it, and a watch was set for him one night, and he was captured. The evidence against him was very clear, and he was bound over to keep the peace for 6 months. He seemed to lose heart in the business after that. He did make 1 or 2 feeble efforts to take up the work again when the 6 months had elapsed, but there was always the same coldness, the same want of sympathy on the part of the world to fight against, and, after a while, he despaired altogether and advertised the instrument for sale at a great sacrifice, owner having no further use for same, and took to learning card tricks instead. It must be disheartening work, learning a musical instrument. You would think that society, for its own sake, would do all it could to assist a man to acquire the art of playing a musical instrument, but it doesn't. I knew a young fellow once who was studying to play the bagpipes, and you would be surprised at the amount of opposition he had to contend with. Why, not even from the members of his own family did he receive what you call active encouragement. His father was dead against the business from the beginning, and spoke quite unfeelingly on the subject. My friend used to get up early in the morning to practice, but he had to give that plan up because of his sister. She was somewhat religiously inclined, and she said it seemed such an awful thing to begin the day like that. So he sat up at night instead, and played after the family had gone to bed, but that did not do, as it got the house such a bad name. People, going home late, would stop outside to listen, and then put it all over the town the next morning that a fearful murder had been committed at Mr. Jefferson's the night before, and would describe how they had heard the victim's shrieks and the brutal oaths and curses of the murderer, followed by the prayer for mercy and the last dying gurgle of the corpse. So they let him practice in the daytime, in the back kitchen with all the doors shut. But his more successful passages could generally be heard in the sitting room, in spite of these precautions, and would affect his mother almost to tears. She said it put her in mind of her poor father. He had been swallowed by a shark, poor man, while bathing off the coast of New Guinea. Where the connection came in she could not explain. Then they knocked up a little place for him at the bottom of the garden, about 1/4 of a mile from the house, and made him take the machine down there when he wanted to work it. And sometimes a visitor would come to the house who knew nothing of the matter, and they would forget to tell him all about it and caution him. Then he would go out for a stroll round the garden and suddenly get within earshot of those bagpipes without being prepared for it, or knowing what it was. If he were a man of strong mind, it only gave him fits, but a person of mere average intellect is usually sent mad. There is, it must be confessed, something very sad about the early efforts of an amateur in bagpipes. I have felt that myself when listening to my young friend. They appear to be a trying instrument to perform upon. You have to get enough breath for the whole tune before you start, at least so I gathered from watching Jefferson. He would begin magnificently with a wild, full, come-to-the-battle sort of note that quite roused you. But he would get more and more piano as he went on, and the last verse generally collapsed in the middle with a splutter and a hiss. You want to be in good health to play the bagpipes. Young Jefferson only learnt to play 1 tune on those bagpipes, but I never heard any complaints about the insufficiency of his repertoire. None whatever. This tune was "The Campbells are Coming, Hooray, Hooray," so he said, though his father always held that it was "The Bluebells of Scotland." Nobody seemed quite sure what it was exactly, but they all agreed that it sounded Scotch. Strangers were allowed 3 guesses, and most of them guessed a different tune each time. Harris was disagreeable after supper. I think it must have been the stew that had upset him. He is not used to high living. So George and I left him in the boat and settled to go for a mooch round Henley. He said he should have a glass of whisky and a pipe and fix things up for the night. We were to shout when we returned, and he would row over from the island and fetch us. "Don't go to sleep, old man," we said as we started. "Not much fear of that while the stew is on," he grunted as he pulled back to the island. Henley was getting ready for the regatta and was full of bustle. We met a goodish number of men we knew about the town, and in their pleasant company the time slipped by somewhat quickly, so that it was nearly 11 o'clock before we set off on our 4-mile walk home, as we had learned to call our little craft by this time. It was a dismal night, coldish, with a thin rain falling, and as we trudged through the dark, silent fields, talking low to each other and wondering if we were going right or not, we thought of the cosy boat with the bright light streaming through the tight-drawn canvas, of Harris and Montmorency and the whisky, and wished that we were there. We conjured up the picture of ourselves inside, tired and a little hungry, of the gloomy river and the shapeless trees, and, like a giant glowworm underneath them, our dear old boat, so snug and warm and cheerful. We could see ourselves at supper there, pecking away at cold meat, and passing each other chunks of bread. We could hear the cheery clatter of our knives, the laughing voices filling all the space and overflowing through the opening out into the night. And we hurried on to realize the vision. We struck the towpath at length, and that made us happy, because prior to this we had not been sure whether we were walking towards the river or away from it, and when you are tired and want to go to bed, uncertainties like that worry you. We passed Shiplake as the clock was striking the 11:45, and then George said, thoughtfully, "You don't happen to remember which of the islands it was, do you?" "No," I replied, beginning to grow thoughtful too. "I don't. How many are there?" "Only 4, answered George. "It will be all right if he's awake." "And if not?" I queried, but we dismissed that train of thought. We shouted when we came opposite the first island, but there was no response, so we went to the second and tried there, and obtained the same result. "Oh, I remember now," said George. "It was the third one." And we ran on hopefully to the third one, and hallooed. No answer. The case was becoming serious. It was now past midnight. The hotels at Shiplake and Henley would be crammed, and we could not go round knocking up cottagers and householders in the middle of the night to know if they let apartments. George suggested walking back to Henley and assaulting a policeman, and so getting a night's lodging in the station house. But then there was the thought, suppose he only hits us back and refuses to lock us up? We could not pass the whole night fighting policemen. Besides, we did not want to overdo the thing and get 6 months. We despairingly tried what seemed in the darkness to be the 4th island, but met with no better success. The rain was coming down fast now, and evidently meant to last. We were wet to the skin, and cold, and miserable. We began to wonder whether there were only 4 islands or more, or whether we were near the islands at all, or whether we were anywhere within a mile of where we ought to be, or in the wrong part of the river altogether. Everything looked so strange and different in the darkness. We began to understand the sufferings of the babes in the wood. Just when we had given up all hope. Yes, I know that is always the time that things do happen in novels and tales, but I can't help it. I resolved when I began to write this book that I would be strictly truthful in all things, and so I will be, even if I have to employ hackneyed phrases for the purpose. It was just when we had given up all hope, and I must therefore say so. Just when we had given up all hope. Then I suddenly caught sight, a little way below us, of a strange, weird sort of glimmer flickering amongst the trees on the opposite bank. For an instant I thought of ghosts. It was such a shadowy, mysterious light. The next moment it flashed across me that it was our boat, and I sent up such a yell across the water that made the night seem to shake in its bed. We waited, breathless, for a minute, and then, oh, divinest of music of the darkness, we heard the answering bark of Montmorency. We shouted back loud enough to wake the 7 sleepers. I never could understand myself why it should take more noise to waken 7 sleepers than 1. And after what seemed an hour, But what was really, I suppose, about 5 minutes, we saw the lighted boat creeping slowly over the blackness and heard Harris's sleepy voice asking where we were. There was an unaccountable strangeness about Harris. It was something more than mere ordinary tiredness. He pulled the boat against a part of the bank from which it was quite impossible for us to get into, and immediately went to sleep. It took us an immense amount of screaming and roaring to wake him up again and put some sense into him, but we succeeded at last and got safely on board. Harris had a sad expression on him, so we noticed, when we got into the boat. He gave you the idea of a man who had been through trouble. We asked him if anything had happened, and he said, "Swans." It seemed we had moored close to a swan's nest, and soon after George and I had gone, the female swan came back and kicked up a row about it. Harris had chivied her off, and she had gone away and fetched up her old man. Harris said he had had quite a fight with these two swans, but courage and skill had prevailed in the end, and he had defeated them. Half an hour afterwards they returned with 18 other swans. It must have been a fearful battle, so far as we could understand Harris's account of it. The swans had tried to drag him and Montmorency out of the boat and drown them, and he had defended himself like a hero for 4 hours and had killed the lot, and they had all paddled away to die. "How many swans did you say there were?" asked George. 32, replied Harris, sleepily. "You said 18 just now," said George. "No, I didn't," grunted Harris. "I said 12. I think I can't count." What were the real facts about these swans we never found out. We questioned Harris on the subject in the morning, and he said, "What swans?" and seemed to think that George and I had been dreaming. Oh, how delightful it was to be safe in the boat after our trials and fears. We ate a hearty supper, George and I, and we should have had some toddy after it if we could have found the whisky, but we could not. We examined Harris as to what he had done with it, but he did not seem to know what we meant by whisky, or what we were talking about at all. Montmorency looked as if he knew something, but said nothing. I slept well that night, and should have slept better if it had not been for Harris. I have a vague recollection of having been woken up at least a dozen times during the night by Harris wandering about the boat with the lantern looking for his clothes. He seemed to be worrying about his clothes all night. Twice he routed up George and myself to see if we were lying on his trousers. George got quite wild the second time. "What the thunder do you want your trousers for in the middle of the night?" he asked indignantly. "Why don't you lie down and go to sleep?" I found him in trouble the next time I awoke because he could not find his socks, and my last hazy remembrance is of being rolled over on my side and of hearing Harris muttering something about it being an extraordinary thing where his umbrella could have got to. Chapter 15. Household duties. Love of work. The old river hand. What he does and what he tells you he has done. Skepticism of the new generation. Early boating recollections. Rafting. George does the thing in style. The old boatman, his method. So calm, so full of peace. The beginner. Punting. A sad accident. Pleasures of friendship. Sailing, my first experience. Possible reason why we were not drowned. Excuse water noises. We woke late the next morning and, at Harris's earnest desire, partook of a plain breakfast with non-dainties. Then we cleaned up and put everything straight, a continual labour which was beginning to afford me a pretty clear insight into a question that had often posed me, namely, how a woman with the work of only one house on her hands manages to pass away her time. And, at about 10, set out on what we had determined should be a good day's journey. We agreed that we would pull this morning as a change from towing, and Harris thought the best arrangement would be that George and I should scull and he steer. I did not chime in with this idea at all. I said I thought Harris would have been showing a more proper spirit if he had suggested that he and George should work and let me rest a bit. It seemed to me that I was doing more than my fair share of the work on this trip, and I was beginning to feel strongly on the subject. It always does seem to me that I am doing more work than I should do. It is not that I object to the work, mind you. I like work. It fascinates me. I can sit and look at it for hours. I love to keep it by me. The idea of getting rid of it nearly breaks my heart. You cannot give me too much work. To accumulate work has almost become a passion with me. My study is so full of it now that there is hardly an inch of room for any more. I shall have to throw out a wing soon. And I am careful of my work, too. Why, some of the work that I have by me now has been in my possession for years and years, and there isn't a finger mark on it. I take a great pride in my work. I take it down now and then and dust it. No man keeps his work in a better state of preservation than I do. But, though I crave for work, I still like to be fair. I do not ask for more than my proper share. But I get it without asking for it. At least so it appears to me. And this worries me. George says he does not think I need trouble myself on the subject. He thinks it is only my over-scrupulous nature that makes me fear I am having more than my due, and that, as a matter of fact, I don't have half as much as I ought. But I expect he only says this to comfort me. In a boat, I have always noticed that it is the fixed idea of each member of the crew that he is doing everything. Harris's notion was that it was he alone who had been working, and that both George and I had been imposing upon him. George, on the other hand, ridiculed the idea of Harris's having done anything more than eat and sleep, and had a cast-iron opinion that it was he, George himself, who had done all the labour worth speaking of. He said he had never been out with such a couple of lazy skulks as Harris and I. That amused Harris. Fancy old George talking about work, he laughed. Why, about half an hour of it would kill him. Have you ever seen George work? He added, turning to me. I agreed with Harris that I never had, most certainly not since we had started on this trip. Well, I don't see how you can know much about it, one way or the other, George retorted to Harris, for I'm blessed if you haven't been asleep half the time. Have you ever seen Harris fully awake except at mealtimes? Asked George, addressing me. Truth compelled me to support George. Harris had been very little good in the boat so far as helping was concerned from the beginning. Well, hang it all, I've done more than Jerome anyhow, rejoined Harris. Well, you couldn't very well have done less, added George. I suppose Jerome thinks he is the passenger, continued Harris. And that was their gratitude to me for having brought them and their wretched old boat all the way up from Kingston, and for having superintended and managed everything for them, and taken care of them, and slaved for them. It is the way of the world. We settled the present difficulty by arranging that Harris and George should scull up past Reading, and that I should tow the boat on from there. Pulling a heavy boat against a strong stream has few attractions for me now. There was a time, long ago, when I used to clamour for the hard work. Now I like to give the youngsters a chance. I notice that most of the old river hands are similarly retiring whenever there is any stiff pulling to be done. You can always tell the old river hand by the way in which he stretches himself out upon the cushions at the bottom of the boat, and encourages the rowers by telling them anecdotes about the marvellous feats he performed last season. Call what you're doing hard work, he drawls between his contented whiffs, addressing the two perspiring novices who have been grinding away steadily upstream for the last hour and a half. Why, Jim Biffles and Jack and I last season pulled up from Marlow to Goring in one afternoon. Never stop once. Do you remember that, Jack? Jack, who has made himself a bed in the prow of all the rugs and coats he can collect, and who has been lying there asleep for the last 2 hours, partially wakes up on being thus appealed to, and recollects all about the matter, and also remembers that there was an unusually strong stream against them all the way, likewise a stiff wind. "About 34 miles, I suppose it must have been," adds the first speaker, reaching down another cushion to put under his head. No, don't exaggerate, Tom," murmurs Jack reprovingly. 33 at the outside." And Jack and Tom, quite exhausted by this conversational effort, drop off to sleep once more, and the 2 simple-minded youngsters at the sculls feel quite proud of being allowed to row such wonderful oarsmen as Jack and Tom, and strain away harder than ever. When I was a young man, I used to listen to these tales from my elders, and take them in, and swallow them, and digest every word of them, and then come up for more. But the new generation do not seem to have the simple faith of the old times. We, George Harris and myself, took a Roran up with us once last season, and we plied him with the customary stretchers about the wonderful things we had done all the way up. We gave him all the regular ones, the time-honoured lies that have done duty up the river with every boating man for years past, and added 7 entirely original ones that we had invented for ourselves, including a really quite likely story, founded, to a certain modified degree, some years ago to a friend of ours. Sorry, I got distracted because Joey's come over to ask for attention. Founded, to a certain extent, on an all but true episode, which had actually happened in a modified degree some years ago to a friend of ours, a story that a mere child could have believed without injuring itself much. And that young man mocked at them all, and wanted us to repeat the feat then and there, and to bet us 10 to 1 that we didn't. Joey, if you're jumping up, mate, could you just jump up? We got to chatting about our rowing experiences this morning. Thank you, Joey. And to recounting stories of our first efforts in the art of oarsmanship. My own earliest boating recollection is of 5 of us contributing 3p each and taking out a curiously constructed raft on the Regent Park Lake, drying ourselves subsequently in the park keeper's lodge. After that, having acquired a taste for the water, I did a good deal of rafting in various suburban brickfields, an exercise providing more interest and excitement than might be imagined, especially when you are in the middle of the pond and the proprietor of the materials of which the raft is constructed suddenly appears on the bank, with a big stick in his hand. Your first sensation on seeing this gentleman is that, somehow or other, you don't feel equal to company and conversation, and that, if you could do so without appearing rude, you would rather avoid meeting him. And your subject is, therefore, to get off on the opposite side of the pond to which he is, and to go home quietly and quickly, pretending not to see him. He, on the contrary, is yearning to take you by the hand and talk to you. It appears that he knows your father, and is intimately acquainted with yourself, but this does not draw you towards him. He says he'll teach you to take his boards and make a raft of them. But seeing that you know how to do this pretty well already, the offer, though doubtless kindly meant, seems a superfluous one on his part, and you are reluctant to put him to any trouble by accepting it. His anxiety to meet you, however, is proof against all your coolness, and the energetic manner in which he dodges up and down the pond so as to be on the spot to greet you when you land is really quite flattering. If he be of stout and short-winded build, you can easily avoid his advances, but when he is of the youthful and long-legged type, a meeting is inevitable. The interview is, however, extremely brief, most of the conversation being on his part, your remarks being mostly of the exclamatory and monosyllabic order, and as soon as you can tear yourself away, you do so. I devoted some 3 months to rafting, and, being then as proficient as there was any need to be at that branch of the art, I determined to go in for rowing proper, and joined one of the Lee boating clubs. Being out in a boat on the River Lee especially on Saturday afternoons, soon makes you smart at handling a craft, and spry at escaping being run down by roughs or swamped by barges, and it also affords plenty of opportunity for acquiring the most prompt and graceful method of lying down flat in the bottom of the boat so as to avoid being chucked out into the river by passing tow lines. But it does not give you style. It was not till I came to the Thames that I got style. My style of rowing is very much admired now. People say it is so quaint. George never went near the water until he was 16. Then he and 8 other gentlemen of about the same age went down in a body to Kew one Saturday, with the idea of hiring a boat there and pulling to Richmond and back. One of their number, a shock-headed youth named Joskins, who had once or twice taken out a boat on the Serpentine, told them it was jolly fun boating. The tide was running out pretty rapidly when they reached the landing stage, and there was a stiff breeze blowing across the river, but this did not trouble them at all, and they proceeded to select their boat. There was an 8-oared racing outrigger drawn up on the stage. That was the one that took their fancy. They said they'd have that one, please. The boatman was away, and only his boy was in charge. The boy tried to damp their ardour for the outrigger and showed them 2 or 3 very comfortable-looking boats of the family party build, but those would not do at all. The outrigger was the boat they thought they would look best in. Joey wishes to go out. 1 second. I return. So the boy launched it, and they took off their coats and prepared to take their seats. The boy suggested that George, who, even in those days, was always the heavy man of any party, should be number 4. George said he should be happy to be number 4, and promptly stepped into Bowles' place and sat down with his back to the stern. They got him into his proper position at last, and then the others followed. A particularly nervous boy was appointed cox, and the steering principal explained to him by Joskins. Joskins himself took stroke. He told the others that it was simple enough. All they had to do was to follow him. They said they were ready, and the boy on the landing stage took a boat hook and shoved them off. What then followed George is unable to describe in detail. He has a confused recollection of having, immediately on starting, received a violent blow to the small of the back from the butt end of number 5's skull, at the same time that his own seat seemed to disappear from under him by magic and leave him sitting on the boards. He also noticed, as a curious circumstance, that number 2 was at the same instant lying on his back at the bottom of the boat, with his legs in the air, apparently in a fit. They passed under Kew Bridge, broadside, at a rate of 8 miles an hour, Joskins being the only one who was rowing. George, on recovering his seat, tried to help him, but on dipping his oar into the water it immediately, to his intense surprise, disappeared under the boat, and nearly took him with it. And the cox threw both rudder lines overboard, and burst into tears. How they got back George never knew, but it took them just 40 minutes. A dense crowd watched the entertainment from Kew Bridge with much interest, and everybody shouted out to them different directions. 3 times they managed to get the boat back through the arch, and 3 times they were carried under it again, and every time the cox looked up and saw the bridge above him, he broke out into renewed sobs. George said he thought that afternoon that he should ever come back. George said he little thought that afternoon that he should ever come to really like boating. Harris is more accustomed to sea rowing than to river work, and says that, as an exercise, he prefers it. I don't. I remember taking a small boat out at Eastbourne last summer. I used to do a good deal of sea rowing years ago, and I thought I should be all right, but I found I had forgotten the art entirely. When one scull was deep down underneath the water, the other would be flourishing wildly about in the air. To get a grip of the water with both at the same time, I had to stand up. The parade was crowded with nobility and gentry, and I had to pull past them in this ridiculous fashion. I landed halfway down the beach and secured the services of an old boatman to take me back. I like to watch an old boatman rowing, especially one who has been hired by the hour. There is something so beautifully calm and restful about his method. It is so free from the fretful haste, that vehement striving that is every day becoming more and more the bane of the 19th century life. He is not forever straining himself to pass all the other boats. If another boat overtakes him and passes him, it does not annoy him. As a matter of fact, they all do overtake him and pass him, all those that are going his way. This would trouble and irritate some people. The sublime equanimity of the hired boatman under the ordeal affords us a beautiful lesson against ambition and uppishness. Plain practical rowing of the get the boat along order is not a very difficult art to acquire, but it takes a good deal of practice before a man feels comfortable when rowing past girls. It is the time that worries a youngster. "It's jolly funny," he says, as for the 20th time within 5 minutes he disentangles his sculls from yours. "I can get on all right when I'm by myself." To see two novices try to keep time with one another is very amusing. Mao finds it impossible to keep pace with Stroke because Stroke rows in such an extraordinary fashion. Stroke is intensely indignant at this, and explains that what he has been endeavouring to do for the last 10 minutes is to adapt his method to Bao's limited capacity. Bao, in turn, then becomes insulted and requests Stroke not to trouble his head about him, Bao, but to devote his mind to getting a sensible stroke. "Oh, shall I take Stroke?" he adds, with the evident idea that would at once put the whole matter right. They splash along for another 100 yards with still moderate success, and then the whole secret of their trouble bursts upon Stroke like a flash of inspiration. "I tell you what it is, you've got my sculls," he cries, turning to Bao. "Pass yours over." "Well, do you know, I've been wondering how it was I couldn't get on with these," answers Bao, quite brightening up, and most willingly assisting in the exchange. "Now we should be all right." But they are not even then. Stroke has to stretch his arms nearly out of their sockets to reach his sculls now, while Bao's pair at each recovery hit him a violent blow in the chest. So they change back again, and come to the conclusion that the man has given them the wrong set altogether, and over their mutual abuse of this man, they become quite friendly and sympathetic. George said he has often longed to take to punting for a change. Punting is not as easy as it looks. As in rowing, you soon learn how to get along and handle the craft, but it takes long practice before you can do this with dignity and without getting the water all up your sleeve. One young man I knew had a very sad accident happen to him the first time he went punting. He had been getting on so well that he had grown quite cheeky over the business, and was walking up and down the punt, working his pole with a careless grace that was quite fascinating to watch. Up he would march to the head of the punt, plant his pole, and then run along right to the other end, just like an old punter. Oh, it was grand. And it would all have gone on being grand if he had not, unfortunately, while looking round to enjoy the scenery, taken just one step more than there was any necessity for, and walked off the punt altogether. The pole was firmly fixed in the mud, and he was left clinging to it while the punt drifted away. It was an undignified position for him. A rude boy on the bank immediately yelled out to a lagging chum to hurry up and see a real monkey on a stick. I could not go to his assistance because, as ill luck would have it, we had not taken the proper precaution to bring out a spare pole with us. I could only sit and look at him. His expression as the pole slowly sank with him I shall never forget. There was so much thought in it. I watched him gently let down into the water, and saw him scramble out, sad and wet. I could not help laughing. He looked such a ridiculous figure. I continued to chuckle to myself about it for some time, and then it was suddenly forced upon me that really I had got very little to laugh at when I came to think of it. Here was I, alone in a punt, without a pole, drifting helplessly down midstream, possibly towards a weir. I began to feel very indignant with my friend for having stepped overboard and gone off in that way. He might, at all events, have left me the pole. I drifted on for about a quarter of a mile, and then I came in sight of a fishing punt moored in midstream, in which sat 2 old fishermen. They saw me bearing down upon them, and they called out to me to keep out of their way. "I can't," I shouted back. "But you don't try," they answered. I explained the matter to them when I got nearer, and they caught me and lent me a pole. The weir was just 50 yards below. I'm glad they happened to be there. The first time I went punting was in company with 3 other fellows. They were going to show me how to do it. We could not all start together, so I said I would go down first and get out the punt, and then I could potter about and practice a bit until they came. I could not get a punt out that afternoon. They were all engaged, so I had nothing else to do but to sit down on the bank, watching the river and waiting for my friends. I had not been sitting there long before my attention became attracted to a man in a punt who, I noticed with some surprise, wore a jacket and cap exactly like mine. He was evidently a novice at punting, and his performance was most interesting. You never knew what was going to happen when he put the pole in. He evidently did not know himself. Sometimes he shot upstream, and sometimes he shot downstream, and at other times he simply spun round and came up the other side of the pole, and with every result he seemed equally surprised and annoyed. The people about the river began to get quite absorbed in him after a while, and to make bets with one another as to what would be the outcome of his next push. In the course of time, my friends arrived on the opposite bank, and they stopped and watched him too. His back was towards them, and they only saw his jacket and cap. From this, they immediately jumped to the conclusion that it was I, their beloved companion, who was making an exhibition of himself, and their delight knew no bounds. They commenced to chaff him unmercifully. I did not grasp their mistake at first, and I thought, how rude of them to go on like that, with a perfect stranger too. But before I could call out and reprove them, the explanation of the matter occurred to me, and I withdrew behind a tree. Oh, how they enjoyed themselves ridiculing that young man. For 5 good minutes they stood there, shouting ribaldry at him, deriding him, mocking him, jeering at him. They peppered him with stale jokes, and even made a few new ones and threw them at him. They hurled at him all the private family jokes belonging to our set, which must have been perfectly unintelligible to him. And then, unable to stand their brutal jibes any longer, he turned round on them, and they saw his face. I was glad to notice that they had sufficient decency left in them to look very foolish. They explained to him that they had thought he was someone they knew. They said they hoped he would not deem them capable of so insulting anyone except a personal friend of their own. Of course, their having mistaken him for a friend excused it. I remember Harris telling me once of a bathing experience he had had at Boulogne. He was swimming about there near the beach, when he felt himself suddenly seized by the neck from behind and forcibly plunged under water. He struggled violently, but whoever had got hold of him seemed to be a perfect Hercules in strength, and all his efforts to escape were unavailing. He had given up kicking, and was trying to turn his thoughts upon solemn things, when his captor released him. He regained his feet, and looked round for his would-be murderer. The assassin was standing close by him, laughing heartily, but the moment he caught sight of Harris's face, as it emerged from the water, he started back and seemed quite concerned. I really beg your pardon," he stammered confusedly, "but I took you for a friend of mine." Harris thought it was lucky for him the man had not mistaken him for a relation, or he would probably have been drowned outright. Sailing is a thing that wants knowledge and practice too, though as a boy I did not think so. Excuse the motorbike. I had an idea it came natural to a body, like rounders and touch. I knew another boy who held this view likewise, and so, on one windy day, we thought we would try the sport. We were stopping down at Yarmouth and decided we would go for a trip up the Yar. We hired a sailing boat at the yard by the bridge and started off. "It's rather a rough day," said the man to us as we put off. "Better take in a reef and luff sharp when you get round the bend." We said we would make a point of it, and left him with a cheery "good morning," wondering to ourselves how you luffed, and where we would get a reef from, and what we were to do with them when we had got it. We rowed until we were out of sight of the town, and then, with a wide stretch of water in front of us, and the wind blowing a perfect hurricane across it, we felt that the time had come to commence operations. Hector, I think that was his name, went on pulling whilst I unrolled the sail. It seemed a complicated job, but I accomplished it at length, and then came the question which was the top end. By a sort of natural instinct, we, of course, eventually decided that the bottom was the top and set to work to fix it upside down. But it was a long time before we could get it up, either that way or any other way. The impression on the mind of the sail seemed to be that we were playing at funerals, and that I was the corpse and itself was the winding sheet. When it found that this was not the idea, it hit me over the head with the boom and refused to do anything. "Wet it," said Hector. "Drop it over and get it wet." He said people in ships always wetted the sails before they put them up. So I wetted it, but that only made matters worse than they were before. A dry sail, clinging to your legs and wrapping itself round your head, is not pleasant, but when the sail is sopping wet, it becomes quite vexing. We did get the thing up at last, the two of us together. We fixed it, not exactly upside down, more sideways like, and we tied it up to the mast with the painter, which we cut off for the purpose. That the boat did not upset, I simply state as a fact. Why it did not upset, I am unable to offer any reason. I have often thought about the matter since, but I have never succeeded in arriving at any satisfactory explanation of the phenomenon. Possibly the result may have been brought about by the natural obstinacy of all things in this world. The boat may possibly have come to the conclusion, judging from a cursory view of our behaviour, that we had come out for a morning suicide, and had thereupon determined to disappoint us. That is the only suggestion I can offer. By clinging like grim death to the gunwale, we just managed to keep inside the boat, but it was exhausting work. Hector said that pirates and other seafaring people generally lashed the rudder to something or other, and hauled in the main top jib during severe squalls, and thought we ought to try to do something of the kind. But I was for letting her have her head to the wind. As my advice was by far the easiest to follow, we ended by adopting it, and contrived to embrace the gunwale and give her her head. The boat travelled upstream for about a mile at a pace I've never sailed at since, and don't want to again. Then, at the bend, she heeled over till half her sail was under water. Then she righted herself by a miracle and flew for a long, low bank of soft mud. That mud bank saved us. The boat ploughed its way into the middle of it and then stuck. Finding that we were once more able to move according to our ideas, instead of being pitched and thrown about like peas in a bladder, we crept forward and cut down the sail. We had had enough sailing. We did not want to overdo the thing and get a surfeit of it. We had had a sail, a good, all-round, exciting, interesting sail, and now we thought we would have a row, just for a change like. We took the sculls and tried to push the boat off the mud, and in doing so we broke one of the sculls. After that we proceeded with great caution, but they were a wretched old pair, and the second one cracked almost easier than the first, and left us helpless. The mud stretched out for about 100 yards in front of us, and behind us was the water. The only thing to be done was to sit and wait for someone until someone came by. It was not the sort of day to attract people out on the river, and it was 3 hours before a soul came in sight. It was an old fisherman, who, with immense difficulty, at last rescued us, and we were towed back in an ignominious fashion to the boatyard. What between tipping the man who had brought us home, and paying for the broken sculls, and for having been out 4 hours and a half, it cost us a pretty considerable number of weeks' pocket money, that sail. But we learned experience, and that, they say, that it is always cheap at any price. Got that last sentence wrong a bit, but that's fine. You got the idea. Chapter 16. And a reminder, this chapter comes with a content warning. Reading. We are towed by steam launch. Irritating behaviour of small boats. How they get in the way of steam launches. George and Harris again shirk their work. Rather a hackneyed story. Streatley and Goring. We came in sight of Reading about 11. The river is dirty and dismal here. One does not linger in the neighbourhood of Reading. The town itself is a famous old place dating from the dim days of King Ethelred, when the Danes anchored their warships in the Kennet and started from Reading to ravage all the land of Wessex, and here Ethelred and his brother Alfred fought and defeated them, Ethelred doing the praying and Alfred the fighting. In later years, Reading seems to have been regarded as a handy place to run down to, when matters were becoming unpleasant in London. Parliament generally rushed off to Reading whenever there was a plague on at Westminster, and in 1625 the law followed suit, and all the courts were held at Reading. It must have been worthwhile having a mere ordinary plague now and then in London to get rid of both the lawyers and the Parliament. During the parliamentary struggle, Reading was besieged by the Earl of Essex, and, a quarter of a century later, the Prince of Orange routed King James's troops there. Henry I lies buried at Reading, in the Benedictine chapel found... Let's have another go at that one. Where did that come from? Henry I lies buried at Reading, in the Benedictine abbey founded by him there, the ruins of which may still be seen, and... in this same abbey, great John of Gaunt was married to the Lady Blanche. Now Joey wishes to come in 1 second. We will, I promise you, get to the end of this chapter. Do you want to come up? Yeah, you are coming up. Okay. At Reading Lock, we came up with a steam launch belonging to some friends of mine, and they towed us to within about a mile of Streatley. It is very delightful being towed up by a launch. I prefer it myself to rowing. The run would have been more delightful still if it had not been for a lot of wretched small boats that were continually getting in the way of our launch, and, to avoid running down which, we had to be continually easing and stopping. It is really most annoying, the manner in which these rowing boats get in the way of one's launch up the river. Something ought to be done to stop it. And they are so confoundedly impertinent, too, over it. You can whistle till you nearly burst your boiler before they will trouble themselves to hurry. I would have 1 or 2 of them run down now and then, if I had my way, just to teach them all a lesson. The river becomes very lovely from a little above Reading. The railway rather spoils it near Tilehurst, but from Mapledurham up to Streatley it is glorious. A little above Mapledurham Lock you pass Hardwick House, where Charles I played bowls. The neighbourhood of Pangbourne, where the quaint little Swan Inn stands, must be as familiar to the habitués of the art exhibitions as it is to its own inhabitants. My friend's launch cast us loose just below the grotto, and then Harris wanted to make out that it was my turn to pull. This seemed to me most unreasonable. It had been arranged in the morning that I should bring the boat up to 3 miles above Reading. Well, here we were, 10 miles above Reading. Surely it was now their turn again. And this is where the content warning begins, if anyone wishes to duck out. I could not get either George or Harris to see the matter in its proper light, however, so, to save argument, I took the sculls. I had not been pulling for more than a minute or so when George noticed something black floating on the water, and we drew up to it. George leant over as we neared it and laid hold of it. and then he drew back with a cry and a blanched face. It was the dead body of a woman. It lay very lightly on the water, and the face was sweet and calm. It was not a beautiful face. It was too prematurely aged-looking, too thin and drawn to be that, but it was a gentle, lovable face in spite of its stamp of pinch and poverty, and upon it was that look of restful peace that comes to the faces of the sick sometimes when at last the pain has left them. Fortunately for us, we having no desire to be kept hanging about coroner's court, some men on the bank had seen the body too, and now took charge of it from us. We found out the woman's story afterwards. Of course, it was the old vulgar tragedy. She had loved and been deceived, or had deceived herself. Anyhow, she had sinned. Some of us do now and then, and her family and friends, naturally shocked and indignant, had closed their doors against her. Left to fight the world alone, with the millstone of her shame around her neck, she had sunk ever lower and lower. For a while she had kept both herself and the child on the 12 shillings a week that 12 hours drudgery a day procured her, paying 6 shillings out of it for the child, and keeping her own body and soul together on the remainder. 6 shillings a week does not keep body and soul together very unitedly. They want to get away from each other when there is only such a very slight bond as that between them, and one day, I suppose, the pain and the dull monotony of it all had stood before her eyes plainer than usual, and the mocking spectre had frightened her. She had made one last appeal to friends, but against the chill wall of their respectability the voice of the erring outcast fell unheeded. And then she had gone to see her child, and held it in her arms, and kissed it, in a weary, dull sort of way, and without betraying any particular emotion of any kind, and had left it, after putting into its hand a penny box of chocolate she had bought it, and afterwards, with her last few shillings, she had taken a ticket and come down to Goring. It seemed that the bitterest thoughts of her life must have centred about the wooded reaches and the bright green meadows around Goring. But women strangely hug the knife that stabs them, and, perhaps, amidst the gall, there may have mingled also sunny memories of sweetest hours spent upon those shadowed deeps over which the great trees bend their branches down so low. She had wandered about the woods by the river's brink all day, and then, when evening fell, and the grey twilight spread its dusky robe upon the waters, she stretched her arms out to the silent river that had known her sorrow and her joy. And the old river had taken her into its gentle arms, and had laid her weary head upon its bosom, and had hushed away the pain. Thus she had sinned in all things, sinned in living and in dying. God help her, and all other sinners, if any more there be. And that's the end of that section, if anyone wants to come back. I'll give you a sec to put it in chat. Goring on the left bank of Streatley and on the right, Goring on the left bank and Streatley on the right are both or either charming places to stay at for a few days. The reaches down to Pangbourne woo one for a sunny sail or for a moonlight row, and the country round about is full of beauty. We had intended to push on to Wallingford that day, but the sweet smiling face of the river here lured us to linger for a while, and so we left our boat at the bridge and went up into Streatley, and lunched at the Bull, much to Montmorency's satisfaction. They say that the hills on each side of the stream here once joined and formed a barrier across what is now the Thames, and that then the river ended there above Goring in one vast lake. I am not in a position either to contradict or affirm this statement. I simply offer it. It is an ancient place, Streatley, dating back, like most riverside towns and villages, to British and Saxon times. Goring is not nearly so pretty a little spot to stop at as Streatley if you have your choice, but it is passing fair enough in its way, and is nearer the railway in case you want to slip off without paying your hotel bill. And that brings us to the end of the chapter and where we shall take a break. So, I'm going to send you all on a break, and maybe if we want to chat things over quickly before we get on with the second half of this, we can do that during and after the break. So do those things that happen in the breaks. Cycle those fluids, stretch what limbs you have available to you, stroke a cat, I don't know. And I'll see you back here in like 5 minutes or so, friends. Bye for now. And we're back. Hello. I hope that everybody has had a worthwhile and fulfilling break, full of the things that you needed to do, whatever they may be. I have not moved because Joey has settled on my lap, and so that's just where we are and how things be. Yeah, as I'll say it here as well, so it's on the VOD. But as I said in chat, I hope that was a worthwhile content warning for people. I just kind of read out what I said. That I couldn't tell if there was like almost some kind of meta joke going on there. Like I'm sort of open to the possibility that the details of the story are something that perhaps a contemporary reader, someone at the time, might see and go, "Oh yeah, this is like almost like a meme at the time or something like that." Like some. I can see a world in which that is still, as dark as it may be, funny because it's not known to be true. It's not sort of told as true, but it's just like almost like a story that everyone knows. And for Jerome to be kind of repeating it as fact here, I could see that being just another one of his like silly, absurd, tall tales or something like that, maybe. But I don't know that, and so to me, the reader now, and presumably to you as well, it just feels like a rapid, unexpected tonal shift from various forms of comedic to dark. Sounded to you like something where it's trying to make the narrator sound overly deep? Yeah, that's the kind of thing. Like, yeah, that's the thing. I feel like it's maybe that, but which he does do a few times. But say not having that understanding myself, I felt that it was best just to like. I mean, even with that knowledge, it's still best to caution people because that can be an upsetting subject for people. Topic is maybe seen as a lot heavier now than it was then. Yeah, exactly. Like there's definitely stuff that he'll just sort of throw out a flippant joke about here that we now are like, maybe don't. So yeah. But anyway, with that said, I think we are largely safe for the rest of the book as we come up to the final section of Three Men and a Boat. We have chapter 17, chapter 18, and chapter 19, and then we're done. Or provide contrast and emphasise how featherbrained the narrator is, not having heard of. Yeah, well, yes, you got it that the narrator is featherbrained. Exactly. Like these people, bless them, are complete buffoons. They are hypocrites. They are, yeah. They are the physical embodiment of calamity and catastrophe. Which, we've still got more coming up, so don't worry about that. Also, I did notice as well, Dave with the raid. I don't know if Dave's still around and how many other people that came over in the raid are still around, but thank you very much. It was lovely, lovely for that, for him doing that, and for anyone that's stuck around for that. Thank you. Lovely to have you here. But yeah, I suppose we shall carry on with firstly some water. And then, Chapter 17, Washing Day, Fish and Fishers, on the Art of Angling, a conscientious fly fisher, a fishy story. We stayed 2 days at Streatley and got our clothes washed. We had tried washing them ourselves in the river under George's superintendence, and it had been a failure. Indeed, it had been more than a failure, because we were worse off after we had washed our clothes than we were before. Before we had washed them, they had been very, very dirty, it is true, but they were just wearable. After we had washed them, well, the river between Reading and Henley was much cleaner after we had washed our clothes in it than it was before. All the dirt contained in the river between Reading and Henley we collected during that wash and worked it into our clothes. The washerwoman at Streatley said she felt she owed it to herself to charge us just 3 times the usual price for that wash. She said it had not been like washing, it had more been the nature of excavating. We paid the bill without a murmur. The neighbourhood of Streatley and Goring is a great fishing centre. there is some excellent fishing to be had here. The river abounds in pike, roach, dace, gudgeon, and eels just here, and you can sit and fish for them all day. Some people do. They never catch them. I never knew anybody catch anything up the Thames except minnows and dead cats, but that has nothing to do, of course, with fishing. The local fisherman's guide doesn't say a word about catching anything. All it says is the place is a good station for fishing, and from what I have seen of the district, I am quite prepared to bear out this statement. There is no spot in the world where you can get more fishing, or where you can fish for a longer period. Some fishermen come here and fish for a day, and others stop and fish for a month. You can hang on and fish for a year if you want to. It will be all the same. The Angler's Guide to the Thames says that jack and perch are also to be had about here, but there the Angler's Guide is wrong. Jack and perch may be about there. Indeed, I know for a fact that they are. You can see them there in shoals when you are out for a walk along the banks. They come and stand half out of the water with their mouths open for biscuits, and if you go for a bathe, they crowd round and get in your way and irritate you. But they are not to be had by a bit of worm on the end of a hook, nor anything like it. Not they. I am not a good fisherman myself. I devoted a considerable amount of attention to the subject at one time, and was getting on, as I thought, fairly well. But the old hands told me that I should never be any real good at it, and advised me to give it up. They said that I was an extremely neat thrower, and that I seemed to have plenty of gumption for the thing, and quite enough constitutional laziness, but they were sure I should never make anything of a fisherman. I had not got sufficient imagination. They said that as a poet, or a shilling shocker, or a reporter, or anything of that kind, I might be satisfactory, but that, to gain any position as a Thames angler, would require more play of fancy, more power of invention than I appeared to possess. Some people are under the impression that all that is required to make a good fisherman is the ability to tell lies easily and without blushing. But this is a mistake. Mere bald fabrication is useless. The veriest tyro can manage that. It is in the circumstantial detail, the embellishing touches of probability, the general air of scrupulous, almost pedantic veracity that the experienced angler is seen. Almost anybody can come in and say, "Oh, I caught 15 dozen perch yesterday evening," or "Last Monday I landed a gudgeon weighing 18 pounds and measuring 3 feet from the tip of the tail." There is no art, no skill required for that sort of thing. It shows pluck, but that is all. No, your accomplished angler would scorn to tell a lie that way. His method is a study in itself. He comes in quietly with his hat on, appropriates the most comfortable chair, lights his pipe, and commences to puff in silence. He lets the youngsters brag away for a while, and then, during a momentary lull, he removes the pipe from his mouth, and remarks, as he knocks out the ashes against the bars, "Well, I had a haul on Tuesday evening that's not much good my telling anybody about." "Oh, why is that?" they ask. "Because I don't expect anybody would believe me if I did," replies the old fellow calmly, and without even a tinge of bitterness in his tone, as he refills his pipe and requests the landlord to bring him 3 of Scotch, cold. There is a pause after this, nobody feeling sufficiently sure of himself to contradict the old gentleman. So he has to go on by himself without any encouragement. "No," he continues thoughtfully, "I shouldn't believe it myself if anybody told me about it, but it's a fact for all that. I've been sitting there all the afternoon and had caught literally nothing, except a few dozen dace and a score of jack, and I was just about giving it up as a bad job when I suddenly felt a rather smart pull at the line. I thought it was another little one, and I went to jerk it up. Hang me if I could move the rod. It took me half an hour, sir, to land that fish, and every moment I thought the line was going to snap. I reached him at last, and what do you think it was? A sturgeon, a 40-pound sturgeon, taken on a line, sir. Yes, you may well look surprised. I'll have another 3 of Scotch, landlord, please." And then he goes on to tell of the astonishment of everybody who saw it, and what his wife said when he got home, and of what Joe Buggles thought about it. I asked the landlord of an inn up the river once if it did not injure him sometimes listening to the tales that the fishermen about there told him, and he said, "Oh, no, not now, sir. He did used to knock me over a bit at first, but Lord love you, me and the missus, we listen to him all day now. It's what you're used to, you know. It's what you're used to." I knew a young man once. He was a most conscientious fellow, and when he took to fly fishing, he determined never to exaggerate his hauls by more than 25%. "When I have caught 40 fish," said he, "then I will tell people that I have caught 50, and so on. But I will not lie any more than that, because it is sinful to lie." But the 25% plan did not work well at all. He never was able to use it. The greatest number of fish he ever caught in one day was 3, and you can't add 25% to 3, at least not in fish. So he increased his percentage to 33 1/3, but that, again, was awkward when he had caught only 1 or 2. So to simplify matters, he made up his mind to just double the quantity. He stuck to this arrangement for a couple of months, and then he grew dissatisfied with it. Nobody believed him when he told them that he only doubled, and he, therefore, gained no credit that way whatever, while his moderation put him at a disadvantage among the other anglers. When he had really caught 3 small fish, he said he had caught 6, and it used to make him quite jealous to hear a man whom he knew for a fact had only caught 1, going about telling people he had landed 2 dozen. So, eventually he made one final arrangement with himself, which he has religiously held to ever since, and that was to count each fish that he caught as 10, and to assume 10 to begin with. For example, if he did not catch any fish at all, then he said he had caught 10 fish. You could never catch less than 10 fish by his system. That was the foundation of it. Then, if by any chance he really did catch 1 fish, he called it 20, while 2 fish would count 30, 3, 40, and so on. It is a simple and easily worked plan, and there has been some talk lately of it being made use of by the angling fraternity in general. Indeed, the committee of the Thames Anglers Association did recommend its adoption about 2 years ago, but some of the older members opposed it. They said they would consider the idea if the number were doubled and each fish counted as 20. If ever you have an evening to spare up the river, I should advise you to drop into one of the little village inns and take a seat in the tap room. You will be nearly sure to meet 1 or 2 old rodmen sipping their toddy there, and they will tell you enough fishy stories in half an hour to give you indigestion for a month. George and I don't know what had become of Harris. He had gone out and had a shave early in the afternoon, and had then come back and spent full 40 minutes in pipe-claying his shoes. We had not seen him since. George and I, therefore, and the dog, left to ourselves, went for a walk to Wallingford on the second evening, and, coming home, we called in at a little riverside inn for a rest and other things. We went into the parlour and sat down. There was an old fellow there, smoking a long clay pipe, and we naturally began chatting. He told us that it had been a fine day today, and we told him that it had been a fine day yesterday, and then we all told each other that we thought it would be a fine day tomorrow, and George said the crops seemed to be coming out nicely. After that it came out, somehow or other, that we were strangers in the neighbourhood, and that we were going away the next morning. Then a pause ensued in our conversation, during which our eyes wandered round the room. They finally rested upon a dusty old glass case, fixed very high up above the chimney-piece, and containing a trout. It rather fascinated me, that trout. It was such a monstrous fish. In fact, at first glance I thought it was a cod. "Ah," said the old gentleman, following the direction of my gaze. "Fine fellow that, ain't he?" "Quite uncommon," I murmured, and George asked the old man how much he thought it weighed. 18 pounds 6 ounces, said our friend, rising and taking down his coat. "Yes," he continued, "it was 16 year ago, come the 3rd of next month, I landed him. I caught him just below the bridge with a minnow. He told me you were in the river, and I said I'd have him, and so I did. You don't see many fish that size about here now, I'm thinking. Good night, gentlemen, good night." And out he went, and left us alone. We could not take our eyes off the fish after that. It really was a remarkably fine fish. We were still looking at it, when the local carrier, who had just stopped at the inn, came to the door of the room with a pot of beer in his hand, and he also looked at the fish. "Good-sized trout, that," said George, turning round to him. "Ah, you may well say that, sir," replied the man. And then, after a pull at his beer, he added, "Maybe you wasn't here, sir, when that fish was caught?" "No," we told him. We were strangers in the neighbourhood. "Ah," said the carrier, "then of course how should you? It was nearly 5 years ago when I caught that trout." "Oh, was it you who caught it then?" said I. "Yes, sir," replied the genial old fellow. "I caught him just below the lock, leastways, what was a lock then, one Friday afternoon, and the remarkable thing about it is that I caught him with a fly. I'd gone out pike fishing, bless you, never thinking of a trout, and when I saw that whopper on the end of my line, blessed if it didn't take me quite aback. Well, you see, he weighed 26 pound. Good night, gentlemen, good night." 5 minutes afterwards, a third man came in and described how he had caught it early one morning, with bleak. And then he left, and a stolid, solemn-looking middle-aged individual came in and sat down over by the window. None of us spoke for a while, but at length George turned to the newcomer and said, "I beg your pardon. I hope you will forgive the liberty that we, perfect strangers in the neighbourhood, are taking, but my friend here and myself would be so much obliged if you would tell us how you caught that trout up there." "Why, who told you I caught that trout?" was the surprised query. We said that nobody had told us so, but somehow or other we felt instinctively that it was he who had done it. "Well, it's a most remarkable thing, most remarkable," answered the stolid stranger, laughing, "because, as a matter of fact, you were quite right. I did catch it. But fancy your guessing it like that. Dear me, it's really a most remarkable thing." And then he went on and told us how it had taken him half an hour to land it, and how it had broken his rod. He said he had weighed it carefully when he reached home, and it had turned the scale at 34 pounds. He went in his turn, and when he was gone, the landlord came in to us. We told him the various histories we had heard about the trout, and he was immensely amused, and we all laughed very heartily. "Fancy Jim Bates and Joe Muggles and Mr. Jones and old Billy Maunders all telling you that they had caught it." "Well, that is good," said the honest old fellow, laughing heartily. "Yeah, they are the sort to give it me to put up in my parlour if they had caught it, they are." And then he told us the real history of the fish. It seemed that he had caught it himself years ago when he was quite a lad, not by any art or skill, but by that unaccountable luck that appears to always wait upon a boy when he plays the wag from school and goes out fishing on a sunny afternoon with a bit of string tied to the end of a tree. He said that bringing home that trout had saved him from a whacking, and that even his schoolmaster had said it was worth the rule of 3 and practice put together. He was called out of the room at this point, and George and I turned our gaze upon the fish. 1 second, Joey wishes to leave. And I'm back. It really was a most astonishing trout. The more we looked at it, the more we marvelled at it. It excited George so much that he climbed up on the back of a chair to get a better view of it. And then the chair slipped, and George clutched wildly at the trout case to save himself, and down it came with a crash, George and the chair on top of it. "You haven't injured the fish, have you?" I cried in alarm, rushing up. "I hope not," said George, rising cautiously and looking about. But he had. That trout lay shattered into 1,000 fragments. I say 1,000, but there may have only been 900. I did not count them. We thought it strange and unaccountable that a stuffed trout should break up into little pieces like that. And so it would have been strange and unaccountable if it had been a stuffed trout. But it was not. That trout was plaster of Paris. Chapter 18. Locks. George and I are photographed. Wallingford. Dorchester. Abingdon. A family man. A good spot for drowning. A difficult bit of water. Demoralizing effect of river air. We left Streatley early next morning and pulled up to Culham and slept under the canvas in the backwater there. The river is not extraordinarily interesting between Streatley and Wallingford. From Cleve you get a stretch of 6.5 miles without a lock. I believe this is the longest uninterrupted stretch anywhere above Teddington, and the Oxford Club makes use of it for their trial 8s. But however satisfactory this absence of locks may be to rowing men, it is to be regretted by the mere pleasure-seeker. For myself, I am fond of locks. They pleasantly break the monotony of the pull. I like sitting in the boat and slowly rising out of the cool depths up into new reaches and fresh views, or sinking down, as it were, out of the world, and then waiting while the gloomy gates creak and the narrow strip of daylight between them widens till the fair smiling river lies full before you, and you push your little boat out from its brief prison on to the welcoming waters once again. They are picturesque little spots, these locks. The stout old lock-keeper, or his cheerful-looking wife or bright-eyed daughter are pleasant folks to have a passing chat with, and there is a footnote here, or rather were. The Conservancy of late seems to have constituted itself into a society for the employment of idiots. A good many of the new lock-keepers, especially in the more crowded portions of the river, are excitable, nervous old men, quite unfitted for their post. You meet other boats there. The river gossip is exchanged. The Thames would not be the fairyland it is without its flower-decked locks. Talking of locks reminds me of an accident George and I very nearly had one summer's morning at Hampton Court. It was a glorious day, and the lock was crowded, and, as is a common practice up the river, a speculative photographer was taking a picture of us all as we lay upon the rising waters. I did not catch what was going on at first, and was therefore extremely surprised at noticing George hurriedly smooth out his trousers, ruffle his hair, and stick his cap on in a rakish manner at the back of his head, and then, assuming an expression of mingled affability and sadness, sit down in a graceful attitude and try to hide his feet. My first idea was that he had suddenly caught sight of some girl he knew, and I looked about to see who it was. Everybody in the lock seemed to have been suddenly struck wooden. They were all standing or sitting about in the most quaint and curious attitudes I have ever seen off a Japanese fan. All the girls were smiling. Oh, they did look so sweet, and all the fellows were frowning and looking stern and noble. And then, at last, the truth flashed across me, and I wondered if I should be in time. Ours was the first boat, and it would be unkind of me to spoil the man's picture, I thought. So I faced round quickly and took up a position in the prow, where I leant with careless grace upon the hitcher, in an attitude suggestive of agility and strength. I arranged my hair with a curl over the forehead, and threw an air of tender wistfulness into my expression, mingled with a touch of cynicism, which I'm told suits me. As we stood, waiting for the eventful moment, I heard someone behind call out, "Hi, look at your nose." I could not turn round to see what was the matter, and whose nose it was that was to be looked at. I stole a side glance at George's nose. It was all right. At all events, there was nothing wrong with it that could be altered. I squinted down at my own, and that seemed all that could be expected also. "Look at your nose, you stupid ass!" came the voice again, louder, and then another voice cried, "Push your nose out, can't you? You two with the dog." Neither George nor I dared to turn around. The man's hand was on the cap, and the picture might be taken any moment. Was it us they were calling to? What was the matter with our noses? Why were they to be pushed out? But now the whole lock started yelling, and a stentorian voice from the back shouted, "Look at your boat, sir! You, in the red and black caps! It's your two corpses that will get taken in the photo if you ain't quick!" We looked then, and saw that the nose of our boat had got fixed under the woodwork of the lock, while the incoming water was rising all around it, and tilting it up. In another moment we should be over. Quick as thought, we each seized an oar, and a vigorous blow against the side of the lock with the butt ends released the boat and sent us sprawling on our backs. We did not come out well in that photograph, George and I. Of course, as was to be expected, our luck ordained it that the man should set his wretched machine in motion at the precise moment that we were both lying on our backs, with a wild expression of, "Where am I? What is this?" on our faces, and our feet waving madly in the air. Our feet were undoubtedly the leading article in that photograph. Indeed, very little else was to be seen. They filled up the foreground entirely. Behind them you caught glimpses of the other boats and bits of the surrounding scenery, but everything and everybody else in the loch looked so utterly insignificant and paltry compared with our feet that all the other people felt quite ashamed of themselves and refused to subscribe to the picture. The owner of one steam launch, who had bespoke 6 copies, rescinded the order on seeing the negative. He said he would take them if anybody could show him his launch, but nobody could. It was somewhere behind George's right foot. There was a good deal of unpleasantness over the business. The photographer thought we ought to take a dozen copies each, seeing that the photo was about 9/10 us, but we declined. We said we had no objection to being photoed full length, but we preferred being taken the right way up. Wallingford, 6 miles above Streatley, is a very ancient town, and has been an active centre for the making of English history. It was a rude, mud-built town in the time of the Britons, who squatted there until the Roman legions evicted them, and replaced their clay-baked walls by mighty fortifications, the trace of which time has not yet succeeded in sweeping away so well those old-world masons knew how to build. But time, though he halted at Roman walls, soon crumbled Romans to dust, and on the ground, in later years, fought savage Saxons and huge Danes, until the Normans came. It was a walled and fortified town up to the time of the Parliamentary War, when it suffered a long and bitter siege from Fairfax. It fell at last, and then the walls were razed. From Wallingford up to Dorchester, the neighbourhood of the river grows more hilly, varied and picturesque. Dorchester stands 1/2 mile from the river. It can be reached by paddling up the Thames if you have a small boat, but the best way is to leave the river at Day's Lock and take a walk across the fields. Dorchester is a delightfully peaceful old place, nestling in stillness and silence and drowsiness. Dorchester, like Wallingford, was a city in ancient British times. It was then called Caerdoran, the city on the water. In more recent times the Romans formed a great camp there, the fortifications surrounding which now seem like low, even hills. In Saxon days it was the capital of Wessex. It is very old, and it was very strong and great once. Now it sits aside from the stirring world, and nods and dreams. Round Clifton Hampden, itself a wonderfully pretty village, old-fashioned, peaceful and dainty with flowers, the river scenery is rich and beautiful. If you stay the night on land at Clifton, you cannot do better than put up at the Barley Mow. It is, without exception, I should say, the quaintest, most old-world inn up the river. It stands on the right of the bridge, quite away from the village. Its low-pitched gables and thatched roof and latticed windows give it quite a storybook appearance, while inside it is even still more once-upon-a-timeified. It would not be a good place for the heroine of a modern novel to stay at. The heroine of a modern novel is always divinely tall, and she is ever drawing herself up to her full height. At the Barley Mow she would bump her head against the ceiling each time she did this. It would be a bad house for a drunken man to put up at. There are too many surprises in the way of unexpected steps down into this room and up into that, and as for getting upstairs to his bedroom, or ever finding his bed when he got up, either operation would be an utter impossibility to him. We were up early the next morning, as we wanted to be in Oxford by the afternoon. It is surprising how early one can get up when camping out. One does not yearn for just another 5 minutes, nearly so much, lying wrapped up in a rug on the boards of a boat with a Gladstone bag for a pillow, as one does in a feather bed. We had finished breakfast, and we were through Clifton Lock by 8:30. From Clifton to Culham, the river banks are flat, monotonous, and uninteresting, but after you get through Culham Lock, the coldest and deepest lock on the river, the landscape improves. At Abingdon, the river passes by the streets. Abingdon is a typical country town of the smaller order, quiet, eminently respectable, clean, and desperately dull. It prides itself on being old, but whether it can compare in this respect with Wallingford and Dorchester seems doubtful. A famous abbey stood here once, and within what is left of its sanctified walls they brew a bitter ale nowadays. In St. Nicholas Church at Abingdon there is a monument to John Blackwall and his wife Jane, who both, after leading a happy married life, died on the very same day, August 21st, 1625. And in St. Helen's Church it is recorded that W. Lee, who died in 1637, had in his lifetime issued from his loins 200 lacking but 3. If you work this out, you will find that Mr. W. Lee's family numbered 197. Mr. W. Lee, 5 times Mayor of Abingdon, was no doubt a benefactor to his generation, but I hope there are not many of his kind about in this overcrowded 19th century. From Abingdon to Newnham Courtney is a lovely stretch. Newnham Park is well worth a visit. It can be viewed on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The house contains a fine collection of pictures and curiosities, and the grounds are very beautiful. The pool under Sandford Lasher, just behind the lock, is a very good place to drown yourself in. The undercurrent is terribly strong, and if you once get down into it, you are all right. An obelisk marks the spot where 2 men have already been drowned while bathing there, and the steps of the obelisk are generally used as a diving board by young men now who wish to see if the place really is dangerous. Iffley Lock and Mill, a mile before you reach Oxford, is a favourite subject with the river-loving brethren of the brush. The real article, however, is rather disappointing after the pictures. Few things I have noticed come quite up to the pictures of them in this world. We passed through Iffley Lock at about 12:30, and then, having tidied up the boat, made all ready for landing, we set to work on our last mile. Between Iffley and Oxford is the most difficult bit of river I know. You want to be born on that bit of water to understand it. I have been over it a fairish number of times, but I have never been able to get the hang of it. The man who could row a straight course from Oxford to Iffley ought to be able to live comfortably under one roof with his wife, his mother-in-law, his eldest sister, and the old servant who was in the family when he was a baby. First, the current drives you on to the right bank, and then on to the left. Then it takes you out into the middle, turns you round 3 times, and carries you upstream again, and always ends by trying to smash you up against a college barge. Of course, as a consequence of this, we got in the way of a good many other boats during that mile, and they in ours, and, of course, as a consequence of that, a good deal of bad language occurred. I don't know why it should be, but everybody is always so exceptionally irritable on the river. Little mishaps that you would hardly notice on dry land drive you nearly frantic with rage, and when they occur on the water. When Harris or George makes an ass of himself on dry land, I smile indulgently. When they behave in a chucklehead way on the river, I use the most blood-curdling language to them. When another boat gets in my way, I feel I want to take an oar and kill all the people in it. The mildest-tempered people, when on land, become violent and bloodthirsty when in a boat. I did a little boating once with a young lady. She was naturally of the sweetest and gentlest disposition imaginable, but on the river it was quite awful to hear her. "Oh, drat that man!" she would exclaim when some unfortunate sculler would get in her way. "Why don't he look where he's going?" And, "Oh, bother the silly old thing!" she would say indignantly when the sail would not go up properly, and she would catch hold of it and shake it quite brutally. Yet, as I have said, when on shore she was kind-hearted and amiable enough. The air of the river has a demoralizing effect upon one's temper, and this this it is, I suppose, which causes even bargemen to be sometimes rude to one another, and to use language which, no doubt, in their calmer moments, they regret. Chapter 19. Oxford. Montmorency's idea of heaven. The hired upriver boat, its beauties and advantages. The pride of the Thames. The weather changes. The river under different aspects. Not a cheerful evening. Yearnings for the unattainable. The cheery chat goes round. George performs upon the banjo. A mournful melody. Another wet day. Flight. A little supper and a toast. We spent 2 very pleasant days at Oxford. There are plenty of dogs in the town of Oxford. Montmorency had 11 fights on the first day and 14 on the second, and evidently thought he had got to heaven. Among folk too constitutionally weak or too constitutionally lazy, whichever it may be, to relish upstream work, it is a common practice to get a boat at Oxford and row down. For the energetic, however, the upstream journey is certainly to be preferred. It does not seem good to be always going with the current. There is more satisfaction in squaring one's back and fighting against it and winning one's way forward in spite of it. At least, so I feel when Harris and George are sculling and I am steering. To those who do contemplate making Oxford their starting place, I would say, take your own boat. Unless, of course, you can take someone else's without any possible danger of being found out. The boats that, as a rule, are let for hire on the Thames above Marlow are very good boats. They are fairly watertight, and so long as they are handled with care, they rarely come to pieces or sink. There are places in them to sit down on, and they are complete with all the necessary arrangements, or nearly all, to enable you to row them and steer them. But they are not ornamental. The boat you hire up the river above Marlow is not the sort of boat in which you can flash about and give yourself airs. The hired upriver boat very soon puts a stop to any nonsense of that sort on the part of its occupants. That is its chief, one may say its only, recommendation. The man in the hired upriver boat is modest and retiring. He likes to keep on the shady side underneath the trees, and to do most of his travelling early in the morning or late at night when there are not many people about on the river to look at him. When the man in the hired upriver boat sees anyone he knows, he gets out on the bank and hides behind a tree. I was one of a party who hired an upriver boat one summer for a few days' trip. We had none of us ever seen the hired upriver boat before, and we did not know what it was when we did see it. We had written for a boat, a double-sculling skiff, and when we went down with our bags to the yard and gave our names, the man said, "Oh, yes, you're the party that wrote for a double-sculling skiff. Yes, all right. Jim, fetch round the Pride of the Thames." The boy went and reappeared 5 minutes afterwards, struggling with an antediluvian chunk of wood that looked as though it had been recently dug out of somewhere and dug out carelessly, so as to have been unnecessarily damaged in the process. My own idea, on first catching sight of the object, was that it was a Roman relic of some sort. Relic of what, I do not know, possibly a coffin. The neighbourhood of the upper Thames is rich in Roman relics, and my surmise seemed to me a very probable one. But our serious young man, who is a bit of a geologist, pooh-poohed my Roman relic theory, and said it was clear to the meanest intellect, in which category he seemed to be grieved that he could not conscientiously include mine, that the thing the boy had found was a fossil of a whale, and he pointed out to us the various evidences proving that it must have belonged to the pre-glacial period. To settle the dispute, we appealed to the boy. We told him not to be afraid, but to speak the plain truth. Was it the fossil of a pre-Adamite whale, or was it an early Roman coffin? The boy said it was the Pride of the Thames. We thought this a very humorous answer on the part of the boy at first, and somebody gave him 2p as a reward for his ready wit. But when he persisted in keeping up the joke, as we thought, too long, we got vexed with him. "Come again, my lad," said our captain sharply. "Don't let us have any nonsense. Take your mother's washing tub home again and bring us a boat." The boat builder himself came up then and assured us, on his word as a practical man, that the thing really was a boat, was in fact the boat, the double-sculling skiff selected to take us on our trip down the river. We grumbled a good deal. We thought he might at least have had it whitewashed or tarred, had something done to it to distinguish it from a bit of a wreck, but he could not see any fault in it. He even seemed offended at our remarks. He said he had picked us out the best boat in all his stock, and thought we might have been more grateful. He said it, the Pride of the Thames, had been in use just as it now stood, or rather as it now hung together, for the last 40 years, to his knowledge, and nobody had complained of it before, and he did not see why we should be the first to begin. We argued no more. We fastened the so-called boat together with some pieces of string, got a bit of wallpaper and pasted over the shabbier places, said our prayers, and stepped on board. They charged us 35 shillings for the loan of the remnant for 6 days, and we could have bought the thing out and out for 4 and 6p at any sale of driftwood around the coast. The weather changed on the 3rd day. Oh, I'm talking about our present trip now, and we started from Oxford upon our homeward journey in the midst of a steady drizzle. The river, with the sunlight flashing from its dancing wavelets, gilding gold and grey-green beech trunks, glinting through the dark, cool wood paths, chasing shadows o'er the shallows, flinging diamonds from the mill-wheels, throwing kisses to the lilies, wantoning with the Weir's white waters, silvering moss-grown walls with bridges, brightening every tiny townlet, making sweet each lane and meadow, lying tangled in the rushes, peeping, laughing from each inlet, gleaming gay on many a far sail, making soft the air with glory, is a golden, fairy stream. But the river, chill and weary, with the ceaseless raindrops falling on its brown and sluggish waters, with the sound as of a woman weeping low in some dark chamber, while the woods, all dark and silent, shrouded in their mists of vapour, stand like ghosts upon the margin, silent ghosts with eyes reproachful, like the ghosts of evil actions, like the ghosts of friends neglected, is a spirit-haunted water through the land of vain regrets. Sunlight is the lifeblood of... Excuse me, I've got a fly that's bothering me. Sunlight is the lifeblood of nature. Count that on your bingo cards. Mother Earth looks at us with such dull, soulless eyes when the sunlight has died away from out of her. It makes us sad to be with her then. She does not seem to know us, or to care for us. She is as a widow who has lost the husband she loved, and her children touch her hand and look up into her eyes, but gain no smile from her. We rode on all that day through the rain, and very melancholy work it was. We pretended at first that we enjoyed it. We said it was a change, and that we liked to see the river under all its different aspects. We said we could not expect to have it all sunshine, nor should we wish it. We told each other that nature was beautiful, even in her tears. Indeed, Harris and I were quite enthusiastic about the business for the first few hours, and we sang a song about a traveller's life and how delightful a traveller's existence was, free to storm and sunshine and to every wind that blew, and how he enjoyed the rain and what a lot of good it did him, and how he laughed at people who didn't like it. George took the fun more soberly and stuck to the umbrella. We hoisted the cover before we had lunch, and kept it up all the afternoon, just leaving a little space in the bow, from which one of us could paddle and keep a lookout. In this way we made 9 miles, and pulled up for the night a little below Day's Lock. I cannot honestly say that we had a merry evening. The rain poured down with quiet persistency. Everything in the boat was damp and clammy. Supper was not a success. Cold veal pie, when you don't feel hungry, is apt to cloy. I felt I wanted whitebait and a cutlet. Harris babbled of soles and white sauce, and passed the remains of his pie to Montmorency, who declined it, and, apparently insulted by the offer, went and sat over at the other end of the boat, by himself. George requested that we would not talk about these things, at all events, until he had finished his cold-boiled beef without mustard. We played penny nap after supper. We played for about an hour and a half, by the end of which time George had won 4pence. George always is lucky at cards, and Harris and I had lost exactly 2pence each. We thought we would give up gambling then. As Harris said, it breeds an unhealthy excitement when carried too far. George offered to go on and give us our revenge, but Harris and I decided not to battle any further against fate. After that, we mixed ourselves some toddy, sat round and talked. George told us about a man he had known who had come up the river 2 years ago, and who had slept out in a damp boat on just such another night as that was, and it had given him rheumatic fever, and nothing was able to save him, and he had died in great agony 10 days afterwards. George said he was quite a young man, and was engaged to be married. He said it was one of the saddest things he had ever known. And that put Harris in mind of a friend of his who had been in the volunteers, and who had slept out under canvas one wet night down at Aldershot, on just such another night as this, said Harris, and he had woken up in the morning disabled for life. Harris said he would introduce us both to the man when we got back to town. It would make our hearts bleed to see him. This naturally led to some pleasant chat about sciatica, fevers, chills, lung diseases and bronchitis, and Harris said how very awkward it would be if one of us were taken seriously ill in the night, seeing how far away we were from a doctor. There seemed to be a desire for something frolicsome to follow up this conversation, and in a weak moment I suggested that George should get out his banjo and see if he could not give us a comic song. I will say for George that he did not want any pressing. There was no nonsense about having left his music at home, or anything of that sort. He at once fished out his instrument and commenced to play Two Lovely Black Eyes. I had always regarded Two Lovely Black Eyes as rather a commonplace tune until that evening. The rich vein of sadness that George extracted from it quite surprised me. The desire that grew upon Harris and myself, as the mournful strains progressed, was to fall upon each other's necks and weep. But by great effort we kept back the rising tears, and listened to the wild, yearnful melody in silence. When the chorus came, we even made a desperate effort to be merry. We refilled our glasses and joined in, Harris, in a voice trembling with emotion, leading, and George and I following a few words behind. Two lovely black eyes, oh, what a surprise, only for telling a man he was wrong, two... There we broke down. The unutterable pathos of George's accompaniment of that two we were, in our then state of depression, unable to bear. Harris sobbed like a little child, and the dog howled till I thought his heart or his jaw must surely break. George wanted to go on with another verse. He thought that when he had got a little more into the tune he could throw more abandon, as it were, into the rendering. It might not seem so sad. The feeling of the majority, however, was opposed to the experiment. There being nothing else to do, we went to bed. That is, we undressed ourselves and tossed about at the bottom of the boat for some 3 or 4 hours, after which we managed to get some fitful slumber until 5 a.m, when we all got up and had breakfast. The second day, was exactly like the first. The rain continued to pour down, and we sat wrapped up in our mackintoshes underneath the canvas and drifted slowly down. One of us, I forget which one now, but I rather think it was myself, made a few feeble attempts during the course of the morning to work up the old foolishness about being children of nature and enjoying the wet. But it did not go down well at all. That "I care not for the rain, not I," was so painfully evident as expressing the sentiments of each of us that to sing it seemed unnecessary. On one point we were all agreed, and that was that, come what might, we would go through with this job to the bitter end. We had come out for a fortnight's enjoyment on the river, and a fortnight's enjoyment on the river we meant to have. If it killed us, well, that would be a sad thing for our friends and relations, but it could not be helped. We felt that to give in to the weather in a climate such as ours would be a most disastrous precedent. "It's only 2 more days," said Harris, "and we are young and strong. We may get over it all right, after all." At about 4 o'clock we began to discuss our arrangements for the evening. We were a little past Goring then, and we decided to paddle on to Pangbourne and put up there for the night. "Another jolly evening," murmured George. We sat and mused on the prospect. We should be in at Pangbourne by 5. We should finish our dinner at, say, 6:30. After that, we could walk about the village in the pouring rain until bedtime, or we could sit in a dimly lit bar parlour and read the almanac. Why the Alhambra would be almost more lively," said Harris, venturing his head outside the cover for a moment and taking a survey of the sky. "With a little supper at the," and the name is redacted, but there is a footnote, "a capital little out-of-the-way restaurant in the neighbourhood of," also redacted, "where you can get one of the best cooked and cheapest little French dinners or suppers that I know of, with an excellent bottle of Boom for 3 and 6, and which I am not going to be idiot enough to advertise." To follow, I added, half unconsciously, "Yes, it's almost a pity we've made up our minds to stick to this boat," answered Harris. And then there was silence for a while. "If we hadn't made up our minds to contract our certain deaths in this bally old coffin," observed George, casting a glance of intense malevolence over the boat, "it might be worthwhile to mention that there's a train leaves Pangbourne, I know, soon after 5, which would just land us in town in comfortable time to get a chop, and then go to the place you mentioned afterwards." Nobody spoke. We looked at one another, and each one seemed to see his own mean and guilty thoughts reflected in the faces of the others. In silence we dragged out and overhauled the Gladstone. We looked up the river and down the river. Not a soul was in sight. 20 minutes later, 3 figures, followed by a shamed-looking dog, might have been seen creeping stealthily from the boathouse at the Swan towards the railway station, dressed in the following neither neat nor gaudy costume: black leather shoes, dirty; suit of boating flannels, very dirty; brown felt hat, much battered; mackintosh, very wet; umbrella. We had deceived the boatman at Pangbourne. We had not had the face to tell him that we were running away from the rain. We had left the boat and all it contained in his charge, with instructions that it was to be ready for us at 9 the next morning. If anything unforeseen should happen preventing our return, we would write to him. We reached Paddington at 7, and drove direct to the restaurant I had before described, where we partook of a light meal, left Montmorency, together with suggestions for a supper to be ready at 10:30, and then continued our way to Leicester Square. We attracted a good deal of attention at the Alhambra. On our presenting ourselves at the pay-box, we were gruffly directed to go round to Castle Street, and were informed that we were half an hour behind our time. We convinced the man, with some difficulty, that we were not the world-renowned contortionists from the Himalaya mountains, and he took our money and let us pass. Inside, we were a still greater success. Our fine, bronzed countenances and picturesque clothes were followed round the place with admiring gaze. We were the cynosure of every eye. It was a proud moment for us all. We adjourned soon after the first ballet, and wended our way back to the restaurant, where supper was already awaiting us. I must confess to enjoying that supper. For about 10 days we seemed to have been living, more or less, on nothing but cold meat, cake, and bread and jam. It had been a simple, a nutritious diet, but there had been nothing exciting about it, and the odour of Burgundy, and the smell of French sauces, and the sight of clean napkins and long loaves knocked as a very welcome visitor at the door of our inner man. We pegged and quaffed away in silence for a while, until the time came when, instead of sitting bolt upright and grasping the knife and fork firmly, we leant back in our chairs and worked slowly and carelessly, when we stretched out our legs beneath the table, let our napkins fall unheeded to the floor, and found time to more critically examine the smoky ceiling than we had hitherto been able to do, when we rested our glasses at arm's length upon the table, and felt good, and thoughtful, and forgiving. Then Harris, who was sitting next to the window, drew aside the curtain and looked out upon the street. It glistened darkly in the wet, the dim lamps flickered with each gust, the rain splashed steadily into the puddles and trickled down the waterspouts into the running gutters. A few soaked wayfarers hurried past, crouching beneath their dripping umbrellas, the women holding up their skirts. "Well," said Harris, reaching his hand out for his glass, "we have had a pleasant trip, and my hearty thanks for it to old Father Thames. But I think we did well to chuck it in when we did. Here's to 3 men well out of a boat." And Montmorency, standing on his hind legs before the window, peering out into the night, gave a short bark of decided concurrence with the toast. The end. And thank you for listening. Ta-da! Oh, I need to stretch. Ugh. Right. So that's how that ended. They made it. They did, in fact, all survive. 3 men well out of a boat is a much better title. Yeah, it's pretty great. I love that it's like within a page they've switched from we shall stick this out, abandoning our principles and leaving this. It is a bit rainy. We could get ill. Okay, let's go. I do know a place in London that I'm not going to say what it is or where it is because I don't want other people to go there. It's mine. We should go there and have dinner French style. It's thank you everybody. It's I have enjoyed this one immensely. I don't know if 3 Men on the Bummel lives up to the same, but I mean it's the same author. It's probably the same conceit. I'm not going to jump straight into that one, obviously, but yeah, I enjoyed this one tremendously, and I look forward to. It looks actually is it longer? Someone do some quick maths and subtract 173 from 347, and we shall figure out how long it is. I'll do that another time. It's more the same, but you think in Germany? Great. You think they take the adventure abroad? God help them and everyone else. Yeah, that is briefly the impression that I've got, that it's like just the same, but elsewhere. But yeah, I really enjoyed that, and it's nice to see that I think everyone else has enjoyed it too. That has been a lot of fun. Yeah, it's been very good. Yeah, there was trying to think which bits I sort of flagged up and wanted to come back to. There was plenty. It's great getting some comedy on here. Right, we're usually so dour and serious. I really enjoyed the descriptions of the pride of the Thames. It was great. Was it the whole bit with the fish? I thought that was very, very good. Just the final punchline before the chapter break of the fish was plaster of Paris. It was. Yeah, the dog versus the kettle was also very good. Yeah, there's it. I'm glad that it managed to it kept the jokes going to the end in the same fashion. It didn't burn itself out with good bits early on and then just sort of wane. Yes, Hampton Court. My dad keeps asking if we got to this bit. Now you want to know why? Oh, Hampton Court, is that the bit with the photos at the lock? Maybe. Yes, yeah, the photo. I mean, it's another very good bit, but yeah, frankly, the book is full of very good bits. I highly recommend it. Obviously, people here have been listening to it, but if you've missed bits, frankly, I think any of the if tonight is your first time being here and listen to this, any of the previous 4 episodes all have very good bits in them. You've not really lost anything by hearing the end. There's just a lot of very good, very dry, kind of sarcastic, self-effacing, well-written comedy. Exactly, Andy Pants. It's very pop-in and outable, and Perola, thank you. The VOD's very listenable. I'm. That's the impression that I've got. It's not. Obviously, there is a story there, but frankly, the story is we are 3 giga clowns on a boat. That's it, really. He even gets in a slight dig at Abingdon. I don't actually harbour any animosity towards Abingdon. It just makes me fun. It makes me laugh because it's somewhere that I know. Used to live fairly close to it, and yeah. It just makes me chuckle that someone's like, wow, Abingdon's a really boring place. Desperately dull. Yeah, it's funny. Take that, Abingdon. You know what you did. And yeah, it's just very good. Giga clowns, and we have no idea that is what we are. Yes. Yeah, is there anything else? I don't know. I always feel like I intend to discuss more at the end of the stream. Oh yeah, apologies for being bothered by a fly. It was in here earlier. Yeah, I said at the start, I called it, and it's been trying to get in my face. I can see it on the window now. Yeah, I don't know. Do we want to sit and chat for a sec, or do you people got places to be? Oh yeah, we do have more emotes. Well, one more that's gone up since the last stream, but anyone who missed the last stream may not have seen either of the new emotes. So we have this cool new little animated skyscape, and this one that Lucy drew up today, of for that feeling for when old books are your personality, and you got books on the brain. Yeah. So there you go. Some new emotes for subscribers, if you like. No brain, only books. Exactly. Head empty, just library. So yeah, if you're subbed, help yourself to them. If you're not, feel free to spend some channel points to get your hands on them. That's completely fine and valid. The book brain one is for followers. Oh, okay. So that's follower emotes you can only use on the channel that the emote is from. So okay, so the book brain one you can only use here, but yeah, that's fair. What's the next book you're thinking of reading? So thank you for asking. Nice Galaxy. Yeah, so the way we tend to do this here, it's not like a rule that we kind of set out within mind, but just the way that I guess we've settled on is like Lucy and I alternate. So one of us will be doing short stories while the other one's reading a more sort of full-length novel. I guess we felt it just gives new listeners like a regular entry point, because if we're both doing a full-length novel and someone kind of comes to the channel in the middle of 2 novels, and you kind of, well, I guess I'll stick around, or I guess I'll go away and come back in 2 months when you're done with the novels. And whereas if one of us is doing short stories, then that means there's regular newly starting content for people to come in on. So me now having finished this, I'm likely to swap over to short stories, or at the most something that can be finished in one stream, or multiple stories in a stream, or probably at the longest something like one of H.G. Wells's one, which might take 2 streams or something. And Lucy, as she says there, is possibly thinking of a Dickens, because she's been looking to read some old Chucky Dickens. Is very emotable indeed. So yeah, that's likely what your next full-length story is going to be, which will be on Wednesdays, probably starting this coming Wednesday, when she will be most likely starting a brand new novel for you to listen to and serialize, while I will be going back over to short stories. And I've not actually decided what ones. I mean, I usually decide pretty late, I guess, but yeah, I've not decided what I'll be doing next Saturday. Could be some more M.R. James, could be some William Hope Hodgson, who knows. I have been really enjoying those a lot lately. I've still got some Gilchrist. yeah, I've got a lot of short stories. It's really just a matter of pointing somewhere in my room, picking up a book and going, yeah, okay, some ones from this. Yeah, that's what those are likely to be. But before all of that, on Monday, we are planning another, because the months keep coming, another Chilitera Tea stream, where Lucy and I show our faces, and we talk for like an hour and some, probably ending up on the subject of media literacy again. It's like literally the one thing I know anything about, because I studied it like 20 years ago and have held on to that like a man at sea to a spa. I don't know why you hold on to a spa. I'm not sure. The prices are extortionate. But anyway, that will be happening on Monday, followed immediately on the same stream, but we split it into two, by talking over the games, where we are, I believe, still continuing Scarlet Hollow. I think we finished episode 3. I think we finished that, which was rad. Let's read The Pearl if you want more of a man in a boat. I think I recognise the name, although I'm not sure if that's modern. But yes, Scarlet Hollow, we finished episode 3, which was superb, and my understanding is that they just kind of keep getting better, so we will be starting episode 4 of Scarlet Hollow on Monday after we've done talking to you for a bit. Oh, a Steinbeck short story, right, thank you, yes. No, I tend to pick from like stuff that I've got and that I'm familiar with anyway. But thank you for the recommendation; it's appreciated. Although, as you said, yes, it's just for men in a boat. But yeah, what was I saying? So yeah, we'll be back on Monday for more sort of podcasty kind of stuff, talking over games as well. And then yeah, back on Wednesday for Lucy starting some Charles Dickens, and then next Saturday, me with some short stories, which I'll be picking out in time. But, you know, keep a look on socials and things. Also on Monday, we'll probably got some cool announcements going up. So, you know, you might want to be there for some news. But otherwise, yeah, we have socials. We have still a Twitter, while that is in its dying throes and is mismanaged into the ground by a man baby, and also a Mastodon, which I set up. If people have Mastodon accounts and wanted to follow us there, personally, I'm actually really quite liking it now that I've sort of got my feet under the desk a little bit there, and it is complicated. I'm not going to pretend it's an easy site to figure out, and there are certainly things that I don't like about it. But on the whole, I'm sort of doing okay. And frankly, you can just click on that thing and like favorite it in your browser and just check back in to see what we're saying there. That would work fine for you. Yeah, and those are the current social spaces for now to follow us. We also have a Bandcamp where we record things better without cat interruptions and coughs and flies getting in your face and other flubs and mistakes and stuff. Lucy goes through and puts in a lot of work editing those out. And yeah, we put stuff up there. If you would like, you can buy them a la carte, or you can subscribe if you want. Yeah, there's that, and those are the main places. We have a coffee account as well, which people sometimes use to chuck us some money to support the channel. We are always grateful for that. But as ever, just being here, watching, listening. Oh, YouTube as well. We also have YouTube where we archive these things, where this will be going probably up later tonight, because if I don't do it immediately, I forget. Sorry, yes, we have a lot of links. But yeah, if you've enjoyed this, you can go and listen to the previous episodes. If you have enjoyed the channel, you can go and listen to all the other things that we've put up there. It is all archived. You'll notice the mic quality and production quality gets a little bit better over time. We're always trying to improve things. But yeah, with all of that tremendously long outro spiel done, I am going to send you off back out into the world. So, where should we go? I see that Cameron from Loading Ready Run, Unarmed Oracle, is playing Civ 6. So, that's usually a pretty nice chill place. I think I said this last time, lovely guy, very good person. It's a pretty quiet, pretty thoughtful, nice place to go and hang out. Yeah, he is way smarter than me, so I always feel a bit intimidated. But yeah, if you want to go over in the raid, go and be good, cool, chill people. He's he may be even listening to plays or audiobooks and stuff now, because he's done that in the past. I've been into a few streams where I was listening to Tom Stoppard plays. But yeah, I'm going to go. So, thank you all for being here. I hope that you've had a good time, and we will see you in the next one. Go take care of yourselves and be cool and lovely people. Goodbye and good night.